Hi, this is DV LeBron with the Ellis Talker Show. Today I have a very special guest, Dr. Carol Swain, a prominent political scientist who discusses stuff like DEI and CRT and how it's infesting our cultures, our school, and what to do about it. She was a former professor. She is an American patriot and a God-fearing woman. How are you, ma'am?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. I wanted to discuss the book that you just came out with, and that was
Right.
the Adversity of Diversity. I wanted you to go ahead and tell me just kind of an overall the book, and then I'll go into it.
I can tell you that the book was 90% written before the U.S. Supreme Court issued its decision in the higher education cases that came out of Harvard University and the University of North Carolina challenging race based affirmative action. And in a 6-3 decision, the court struck down the use of race in college admissions. And I anticipated the fall of the race based programs because of the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and critical race theory industries. They had become so aggressive and blatant in their discrimination against whites and Asians. And I reached the conclusion that the only way the court could sort of pull it back to the Constitution and pull it back to our civil rights laws, they would have to rule in favor of the Asian students. It was Asian students at Harvard and North Carolina that brought the lawsuits because they tend to be the highest scoring students. They score higher than whites. And they were being held back because of a quota that favored racial and ethnic minorities, and it worked to the disadvantage of Asians and whites who were higher achieving students. And what we find with diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that have taken over workplaces across America and our U.S. military, where you find the focus is not on winning wars, protecting Americans' freedoms at home and abroad, but it's on drag shows, DEI, transgenderism, everything uh, except equipping people to fight in the military. So that's the backdrop. The book argues that uh, DEI and CRT programs are doomed to fall for the same reasons because they violate the U.S. Civil Rights Act and they violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and therefore they are unconstitutional. And more individuals will be bringing successful lawsuits against these programs in the workplace.
In this book, you discuss on one of the chapters, you're discussing how this Texas professor, I think it was a Texas professor, was talking about using non-state emails to go around that decision of the Supreme Court. Are you seeing that?
Well, not only that, I think it wasn't the American Bar Association, but it was a legal association that met about a week ago to discuss ways to evade the Supreme Court decision. And they believe it's critical to do so because, in their worldview, racial and ethnic minorities are inferior. If you hold them to the same standards, they cannot compete. And so when they make this argument, they totally ignore the history leading up to affirmative action before affirmative action became preferential treatment. When the civil rights movement first started, the fight was for non-discrimination and equal opportunity, and blacks in Washington D.C. and in other places where you had tests and the admission or the job went to the person who had the highest test score, that blacks were very successful in preparing for tests and being able to pass tests because it took the discrimination element out of it. So the civil rights movement was not fought for quotas and lowered standards. It was fought to get people out of the way to allow blacks to compete on the same basis as any other group. And it was white male elites in the Nixon administration the Johnson administration that pushed for racial quotas and racial preferences. Up until then, the civil rights movement was not about that.
Yeah, and as a Puerto Rican, I'm multi-ethnic, and I never once in my life did I want any, I didn't need a white savior. I didn't need some white person to do something for me. I didn't see them like that, and that's not what I wanted. I just wanted some equal footing. You
Me
grew up
too.
in the South. You grew up in the South, and you became quite accomplished. And you did it in a time when they said it was just impossible, and that all they basically make it look like there was no way that black people could succeed at that time at all, and you did it. So
I
I mean,
did.
did you really need those programs?
Well, let me tell you, I was born in 1954, and that was the year of the Brown v. Board of Education case from Topeka, Kansas, that desegregated public schools. But in Virginia, where I live, the schools were not desegregated until 1968. And I ended up dropping out of school, marrying at age 16, and later getting a high school equivalency and going to a community college. I made the dean's list a couple of times at the community college. I applied to a 4-year school and made a decision to be an honor student. I checked out books on how to make A's in college, how to take essay exams, how to take objective tests. I applied those principles and graduated magna cum laude while working full time. And I went on to graduate school. And while I was there, I was pressured into applying to a PhD program. And I ended up, being a hot shot as a student, landing a job at Princeton, earning early tenure, winning 3 national prizes, being cited by the U.S. Supreme Court. And I would argue that I benefited from the equal opportunity that was afforded me. I benefited from people that were looking for talented minorities. I benefited from the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And I made a decision to apply myself. And I can tell you, back in 1983, when I was a senior at Roanoke College, I wrote my senior thesis on affirmative action. And I was critical of aspects of the program back then. In my new book, The Adversity of Diversity, I quote from my 1983 paper that I got an A plus on. And why I soured on affirmative action back in 1983 was that my white male classmates would tell me, "Oh, you have it made. You're a black woman. You're a twofer." Or they would say things like, "I've been looking for a job, and if I'd been black, I'd have a job." And they seem to have thought that black people went to school free and all of these things that were not true. And then I had black classmates that came from affluent backgrounds, had, lived the good, strong middle class life, and they had grade point averages below 1.0. That's below a D, almost
Mhm.
an F. And they were telling me, "I'm going to law school, I'm going to medical school. Uh, they have to let us in," they would say. They have to let us in. And I don't believe those people actually became lawyers and doctors, because I don't believe that the standards were ever that low, but they didn't know that. They thought they could still go. And then there was some racial and ethnic minorities that truly believed that black people couldn't do anything, and that without affirmative action, we were all doomed to fail. And that's why I soured on the program back in the early 1980s. And when I was on the job market for professorships, I refused to apply for minority positions where they would have 3 black people apply for a job, a faculty teaching job, and they would compete against one another. I insisted on competing in the general pool.
Yeah, that's how you do it. Now, I wanted to get to you about, or ask you about, the difference between equity and equality,
Right.
and how this play on words, how they're different.
But I can tell you that equal opportunity, uh, and I'm sure we both experienced that. You had an opportunity to get into the system, whether it was an institution or a job, but you had to prove yourself, and you could fail. you had an equal opportunity to succeed or to fail, and many people did not succeed. Equity means equal outcomes. And so there's this uh, move to lower the standards so that racial and ethnic minorities can't fail. And that's based on a racist belief that they are incapable of competing. So equal opportunity is not the same as equity. Equity means equal outcomes, and that's something they slipped on us recently. And diversity, there's nothing wrong with diversity. And in my book, I argue that we can have diversity without discrimination. And if, as a Christian, I can attest to the fact that God is a God of diversity. The whole
Amen.
universe is diverse. And when I was applying to colleges and as a young adult, uh, diversity meant that colleges and universities or employers sent out recruiters, and they were looking for talented people, and they were making you aware of opportunities. In fact, I grew up so poor, I thought that only rich people could go to college. I didn't even know about the scholarships and opportunities for talented people who were poor. And so diversity used to mean outreach, recruitment. It changed meaning. And so now in DEI, it's about groups. It's about getting so many members of a group, whether or not they're qualified or not, making sure that you have them there, check the box, and they are encouraged not to integrate and to become a part of the whole, to become a productive member of a team. They're encouraged to form their own little affinity groups, and those descend into gripe sessions.
Hmm. And you know what? Diversity back in my day when we were growing up, and that kind of push, it was a reconciliatory kind of thing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry that the word doesn't come out, but we were,
Reconciliation.
yeah, we were. It was a reconciliation, and you talk about that in the book. It was about getting together and recognizing all as one human race under God. And that completely changed. This DEI is completely different now. That George. Rahm Emanuel had said, "Never let a crisis go to waste." You mentioned this in your
Right.
book, and I'm paraphrasing, but you talk about how George Floyd sped this up and how it influenced. So, can you kind of speak on that and how companies had to respond?
Well, first of all, I can tell you that George Floyd, his unfortunate death was used to create a narrative that, if you look too closely, it doesn't even hold up. You look at the entire tape of George Floyd's death, of him being in the police car and him asking to be taken out because he was having trouble breathing and asking, to be on the ground. The first autopsy said that he had fentanyl and some other drugs in his system, really enough to kill a person. And he had all kinds of heart disease, all kinds of conditions that were factors in his death. So the first autopsy did not say that he was murdered by a police officer. The family got two other autopsies, but the left saw an opportunity with playing a clip of his death and the police officer, appearing to kneel on his neck. They used that to ram through all kinds of programs and demands, and they got billions of dollars from corporations. Black Lives Matter, they raised maybe $100 million off of George Floyd's death, spent the money, did not share it with the Black Lives Matter chapters in cities that thought that they were going to be able to get resources for their programs and things they were doing on the ground. No, they used it to buy homes and to enrich themselves. And I understand that they are approaching bankruptcy. Van Jones got millions of dollars from it. And he's pretty much blown through his millions of dollars. And it was just a way for certain people to enrich themselves at the expense of others. And the death of George Floyd was used to play on the heartstrings, but also to shake down corporations.
There's money in this. There's big time money in this, in division and dividing Americans, and it's doing just that. It's putting us into so many little groups that were fighting each other so much, and then That's why somebody like that Oliver Anthony, who struck a chord with his song "Rich Men North of Richmond," hit
Right.
such a it hit the soul of Americans, because we're seeing this. We're seeing
Right.
the way that this is affecting us. But I wanted to ask you, with this DEI training and the way that it causes divisiveness and how it's sinking into our well, it's already in our academic, but it's sinking into our kids' schools, and it's infesting everything. How do we come out of that? And how do we, what is an antidote to it,
Well,
to actually get something out of it?
there are a couple of things going on with the DEI and CRT. It's been in the K-12 schools for a long time, and when we had the COVID lockdowns, that's when parents became aware of just how far gone the schools are. And the last year or so has been about the transgenderization of children and that agenda. And that is part of the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's the form that it has taken in the public schools. And as far as DEI, it is very much in all the workplaces, whether we talk about governmental institutions, the U.S. military, or corporations. And it's backfiring. The DEI programs have never worked, and there's plenty of research on that coming even from liberal sources that the programs don't work. They create divisiveness, and they leave workplaces worse off. And so, part of what I talk about in my concluding chapter is unity training. It's very important for uh, CEOs and owners of companies to make sure that they understand the civil rights laws of our nation. There's nothing wrong with the civil rights laws. Everyone needs to understand that our civil rights laws protect all persons. But when it comes to organizations, they need to focus on the mission. What were they formed to accomplish? You know, who established them? But they need to get back to the mission, and I believe that you can have healthy workplaces. We can go back to e pluribus unum out of many one and set up a situation where you have people working together as teams around the mission of the organization. And that is far more positive. And we need to get away from celebrating all these different groups, their special days, their special identities. That has no place in the workplace. What they need to do is focus on the job that they were hired to do. And if the employer wants to recognize major holidays, you know, recognize the major holidays, but the inbox should not be flooded with emails from the DEI officer or HR telling people that they have to participate in activities that take them away from the job, forces them to do things against their will, and violates their rights. Because if you are an employee, whether you're white or black or whatever, and you're told that it's mandatory that you go through a sensitivity training or DEI training, and you go in there and there's a trainer that is yelling at you or telling you that because your group is guilty of something, you can't speak, that you can only listen, or telling you to recite or renounce, you know, your racism or whatever they are demanding, that can be a violation of a person's First Amendment rights. And many of the situations where there have been successful lawsuits against corporations, these have occurred because employers and supervisors are often so ill informed that they would tell a white employee that we have to let you go because I need to hire a racial and ethnic minority. I need to hire some diverse person. I need to hire this Asian or this black or this woman. They will openly say these things, and employees are getting more savvy. They are gathering information, and they are successfully winning lawsuits, like the woman that won a $25 million judgment against Starbucks. And there are other cases being settled, and other cases where lawsuits are being brought against the corporations that have hired DEI officers who have used tactics and strategies that violate the law.
This whole DEI thing is constantly searching for a problem that's not there. and creating one. And that's what it does. And it creates divisiveness, and it's actually, destroying us as a country. And I hope that we come out of it. Dr. Carol Swain, again, thank you so much for coming on my little show. I appreciate you having you on, and what you do for us as far as fighting this good fight. Thank you so much for doing it, ma'am. And I pray for you often.
I appreciate it very much. Have
you
a good
take care. Bye-bye.
day.